Hey guys, tonight we're diving into something that'll make your worst camping trip look like a 5-star resort. Picture this, you're standing at the edge of a medieval battlefield campsite, and the smell hits you first. A wall of human waste, rotting food, infected wounds, and unwashed bodies that have been marinating in wool and leather for weeks. Your eyes water, your stomach lurches, and somewhere in the back of your mind, a little voice whispers, "I've made a terrible mistake." Because here's the thing about medieval warfare that the movies conveniently forget to mention. The battle itself was almost the least of your worries. It's everything else. The waiting, the living conditions, the slow march toward that one violent day, that would absolutely destroy you. We're talking about an existence so brutal, so relentlessly miserable, that you'd probably tap out before you even saw an enemy soldier. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. I love seeing this community span the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You arrive at camp after a forced march that started before dawn. 20 miles, maybe 25. You've lost count because somewhere around mile 15 your feet went numb, and by mile 18 you'd entered a kind of walking meditation where the only thought in your head was left, right, don't fall down, don't fall down. Your boots, if you're lucky enough to have actual boots and not just leather wrappings, are soaked through with a mixture of sweat, mud, and blood from the blisters that popped hours ago. Each step makes a wet squelching sound that would be funny if you had any energy left for humor. The guy next to you, a farmer named Willem who smells like onions and desperation, has been coughing since yesterday. Not just clearing your throat coughing, but the deep, wet, rattling kind that speaks of things growing in lungs that shouldn't be growing there. He spits occasionally, and you've learned to watch for the telltale shoulder hitch that means he's about to let fly. Medieval military formations didn't exactly prioritize personal space. Your commander, a knight whose name you don't know and who definitely doesn't know yours, finally raises his hand. The column stops. You've reached the campsite, though sight is generous. It's just a field, a muddy, slightly less muddy than the road field next to a stream that's already starting to look suspicious. Hundreds of men are already here, and hundreds more are arriving from other directions. By nightfall, there will be thousands of you, all crammed into this temporary city of misery. Now, here's where your modern sensibilities really start screaming. You look around for your accommodations. Where's the tent? Where's the designated sleeping area? Where's the anything? And the answer is right here, right where you're standing. This patch of mud? Congratulations, you've just checked into the Hotel de Battlefield. And the amenities include ground and more ground. If you're a common foot soldier, which you are because nobles had their own tents and we'll get to that injustice later, you don't get a tent. You get maybe a cloak if you're lucky. Some armies issued simple canvas sheets that you could prop up with sticks if you found sticks and had the energy. But many soldiers just slept in the open. Rain? You get wet. Cold? You shiver. Hot? You sweat. The medieval military accommodation policy was essentially deal with it. But wait, it gets better. You're not just sleeping on the ground. You're sleeping on ground that thousands of soldiers, horses, and camp followers have already churned into a biological soup. The stream I mentioned, within hours it'll be contaminated by upstream latrine runoff, horse manure, and the casual disposal of anything people don't want to carry anymore. Downstream, idiots are filling water barrels from it anyway because the alternative is dying of thirst, so pick your poison. The first thing you need to do is stake out your territory. This involves a subtle dance of intimidation and negotiation with the soldiers around you. Too close to the latrine area, which hasn't been officially designated yet, but everyone knows it'll be that downwind spot over there, and you'll regret it all night. Too close to the horse lines and you'll get kicked, bitten, or buried under equine excrement. Too far from the fires and you'll freeze. Too close to the fires and you'll become everyone's thoroughfare to the warmth. You drop your pack, a leather bag containing your worldly campaign possessions. A spare shirt if you're fortunate, a wooden bowl, maybe a knife, and whatever rock-hard bread you managed to save from this morning's distribution. The pack hits the mud with a wet thud. This This sad little thud is the sound of your standards hitting the floor. Welcome to the suck. Willem collapses next to you, still coughing. Good spot, he wheezes, though you both know it's not. There are no good spots. There are only degrees of terrible, and you've claimed a patch of terrible that's slightly elevated, which means it might not become a pond if it rains tonight. It's going to rain tonight. It always rains at night on campaign. Historians still argue whether medieval weather was actually worse or if it just seemed worse when you had to live outside in wool. But either way, you're about to find out. The camp is organized chaos. Sergeants are shouting. Horses are screaming. Someone's already started a fight over sleeping space 3 rows over, and the rhythmic sound of fists hitting flesh carries clearly across the evening air. No one intervenes. The unwritten rule of camp is that as long as nobody dies and it doesn't disrupt the battle readiness, men can sort out their disputes however they want. Medieval HR was not particularly robust. You notice the smell is getting worse, if that's possible. It's because everyone's stopping, and when you stop moving, you start noticing things. The guy 4 spots over has clearly not changed his underclothes since the campaign started 3 weeks ago. The combination of sweat, bacteria, and wool has created a smell so potent it's practically visible, like heat waves rising off summer asphalt. In fact, the average medieval soldier smelled so bad that historical accounts from the period regularly mention the smell of the army as something you could detect from miles away. Enemy scouts literally sniffed out approaching forces. But here's the kicker, you smell just as bad. You just can't smell yourself anymore. Your nose gave up days ago and declared olfactory bankruptcy. Some mercy, really. If you could smell yourself the way others smell you, you'd probably just walk into the enemy lines and ask them to put you out of your misery. As the sun starts to set, and medieval camps operated on solar time because nobody had watches and only nobles could afford personal sundials, the camp settles into its evening routine. Fires are being lit, though not as many as you'd think. Wood is a premium resource, and the commanders are paranoid about giving away positions to enemy scouts. Plus, in the smoke-filled chaos of hundreds of fires in a confined space, the camp takes on the atmosphere of a particularly hellish barbecue where the meat is questionable and everyone's eyes are watering. You're assigned to a mess group, about 8 to 10 men who'll cook and eat together. This isn't bonding time. This is survival logistics. Your group consists of Willem, still coughing, 2 brothers from somewhere north who don't speak your dialect, a gaunt man who keeps muttering prayers, a teenager who looks about 14 and scared out of his mind, and a few other forgettable souls who've all made the same terrible life choices that led them here. Someone produces a cooking pot. Someone else has managed to secure some firewood by methods you don't ask about. You pool your resources. Some grain, an onion that's seen better days, and a chunk of something that might be salted pork but could honestly be boot leather. Into the pot, it all goes with water from the stream. You try not to think about what else is in that water. You fail. While the food bubbles away in a way that's more threatening than appetizing, you take stock of your situation. Your feet are destroyed. Your back aches from carrying your equipment. Your stomach is already making concerning noises from this morning's questionable meal. You're exhausted, but you know you won't sleep well because the ground is hard, it's going to rain, and Willem's coughing will keep everyone awake anyway. And here's the thing that really drives it home. This is day 1 of the encampment. The battle isn't for 3 days, maybe 4, maybe a week if the nobles need to finish negotiating or if the enemy is still marching. You're going to live like this in this exact spot of mud, with these same smells and sounds and miseries, until someone decides it's time for you to potentially die. The first drops of rain start falling just as your soup reaches something approximating edibility. Of course they do, because the universe has a sense of humor, and in the medieval military, that humor is exclusively schadenfreude. You pull your cloak tighter, that same cloak that's supposed to be your blanket, your raincoat, your privacy screen, and your only barrier between you and the cold ground, and you eat your lukewarm grain slurry while water runs down your neck. Welcome to the Medieval Battlefield Camp. You've been here 3 hours, and already you're understanding something that history books gloss over. Most soldiers didn't die heroically in battle. They died slowly, miserably, in camps just like this one, from diseases with names that wouldn't be discovered for another 500 years, treating symptoms with remedies that made things worse, surrounded by thousands of other men who were all collectively having the worst experience of their lives. And the worst part? You can't leave. Desertion is punishable by death if you're caught, and you probably will be caught because where are you going to go? You're days from home, you have no money, you don't know the local language or geography, and the countryside is full of bandits who'd kill you for your boots. Those same boots that are currently dissolving in the rain. So you sit in the mud, you eat your slurry, you listen to Willem cough and the rain fall and the camp settle into its nighttime cacophony of snores, groans, arguments, and the occasional scream from someone having a nightmare or losing a fight. Tomorrow it starts all over again. And the day after that. And the day after that. You wouldn't last a day. Trust me on this one. The rain stops around midnight, which would be good news except now you're just lying in cold wetness instead of having fresh rain distract you from the cold wetness. You've been trying to sleep for what feels like hours, but sleep in a medieval camp isn't really sleep. It's more like a series of exhausted micronaps interrupted by discomfort, noise, and the occasional boot to your ribs when someone stumbles over you on their way to relieve themselves. Your bed is exactly what you left it, mud. But now it's cold mud that's soaked through your cloak and is working its way through every layer you're wearing. You've tried curling into a ball to conserve warmth. You've tried stretching out to avoid cramping. You've tried lying on your side, your back, even your stomach despite the fact that position makes your equipment dig into your ribs. Nothing works. Nothing is comfortable. The concept of comfort is a distant memory from your previous life, back when you slept on actual straw mattresses and thought you had problems. Willem is still coughing, of course, but now he's not alone. The teenager from your mess group has developed a cough too, and someone 3 rows over is making sounds that suggest his digestive system has declared war on itself. These are the lullabies of the medieval military. Coughing, groaning, farting, snoring, and the distant sound of men arguing about something that definitely doesn't matter but feels crucial at 2 in the morning when you're cold and miserable and looking for someone to blame. Here's something the history books politely skip over. You're not sleeping alone on your patch of mud. You've got company. Lots of it. Lice, for starters. Those little parasites started the campaign in someone's woolens and have spent the last few weeks building a multi-generational empire in the cramped, warm, unwashed conditions of army life. By now, every soldier in camp is hosting entire civilizations of lice. You can feel them moving, biting, reproducing. It's a constant itch that you can't satisfy because scratching just makes it worse, and anyway, your hands are filthy, so you'd probably just give yourself an infection. The lice aren't even your biggest problem in terms of camp bedmates. Rats. Medieval camps attracted rats the way modern dumpsters attract raccoons. Except these rats are bolder, hungrier, and carrying diseases that won't be named for centuries, but will absolutely ruin your week. They scurry through the camp at night looking for food scraps, and they're not particularly picky about whether you're awake or asleep when they investigate your area. You've already felt something small and furry run across your legs twice. You've chosen not to react because what are you going to do? Chase a rat through a dark camp while thousands of armed, irritable men are trying to sleep? That's a good way to get stabbed. But wait, there's more. Fleas. Ticks when you're camped near woods. Bedbugs if you're camped near an old settlement. The medieval battlefield camp is essentially a buffet for parasites, and you're the main course. Historians estimate that the average soldier on campaign was host to dozens of different parasites at any given time, creating a mobile ecosystem of misery that moved with the army. Some soldiers gave up and just accepted their itchy fate. Others tried remedies like rubbing themselves with vinegar or garlic, which didn't work but at least added variety to the ambient smell. Around what you estimate is 3 in the morning, though you're just guessing based on the moon's position and the fact that you're still conscious, unfortunately, the real danger of sleeping in a medieval camp reveals itself. You hear a scuffle. Not the distant kind, but close. Very close. 2 rows over. Voices hissing angry whispers. Then a short, sharp cry that cuts off abruptly. Then silence. Heavy silence. The kind of silence that makes every soldier within earshot pretend to be deeply asleep while their hearts hammer in their chests. Throat cutting. It happened. Not every night, but often enough that you slept with one eye open if you were smart. Medieval military justice was spotty at best, discipline was inconsistent, and the army was full of men who'd been pressed into service against their will. Criminals offered military service instead of execution, and general opportunists who saw the chaos of war as a chance to settle scores or rob their neighbors. Sleeping in the open meant you were vulnerable. Some soldiers tried to sleep in shifts, taking turns on watch, but exhaustion usually won and everyone just hoped they wouldn't be the unlucky one. The thing that makes it worse is that you don't know who's dangerous. Is it Willem, still coughing beside you, who seems harmless but might be desperate enough to kill for the extra bread ration you're hiding in your pack? Is it one of the brothers who don't speak your language and might have very different ideas about property rights? Is it the gaunt prayer-mutterer who might have convinced himself that God wants him to eliminate sinners starting with his tent mates? Everyone is a potential threat. Trust is a luxury you can't afford. You clutch your knife a little tighter. It's not much. A simple eating knife that doubles as your only weapon besides the spear you were issued, but it's something. You position it where you can grab it quickly. You try to sleep with your pack under your head, both to keep it from being stolen and to give your head something besides mud to rest on. It doesn't work. The pack is lumpy and uncomfortable, but slightly less uncomfortable than mud. So congratulations, you've discovered the medieval military's version of an upgrade. As false dawn starts to gray the sky, that pre-sunrise period when everything looks vaguely threatening and you can't quite see clearly, the camp begins to stir. Not because anyone's rested or ready, but because lying in cold mud becomes unbearable after enough hours and movement seems better than stillness. Men start crawling out from under their cloaks, groaning, cursing, spitting. The sounds of an army waking up are not majestic. They're phlegmy. You haven't slept more than 2 hours total, and not consecutive hours. You feel worse than when you lay down, which seems impossible but is actually the standard medieval camp experience. Your back has seized up from the cold and damp. Your neck is kinked from using your pack as a pillow. Every joint aches. Your feet, which you foolishly left in your wet boots overnight because you were too tired to deal with them and too afraid someone would steal them if you took them off, have presumably evolved into something new and horrifying. You don't want to look. But here's where it gets really fun. You still have to function. There's no sick day in medieval warfare. There's no, I didn't sleep well. Can I take it easy today? You're expected to be ready to march, drill, or fight regardless of how you feel. The army doesn't care about your comfort. Your commanders definitely don't care. The knight whose name you still don't know would ride his horse right over you without noticing if you stayed in your sleeping spot too long. The guy 2 rows over, the one from the throat-cutting incident, is still there. Still dead. In daylight, you can see it's someone you didn't know, which is a small mercy for your conscience but a stark reminder for your paranoia. A couple of soldiers are checking his body, not out of concern but to see if he has anything worth taking. His boots are already gone. His cloak too. By the time the sergeants come around for the body count, and yes, they do a count not because they care about individual soldiers but because they need to know how many effective fighters they have, he'll be stripped to his underclothes. No investigation, no justice, no moment of silence. Medieval military authorities would investigate obvious murders if they thought it was disrupting discipline or if the victim was someone important, but a random nobody killed in his sleep. That's just Tuesday. His body will be dragged to a mass grave pit along with last night's other casualties. 2 men who died of fever, one who apparently had a heart condition nobody knew about, and one who might have been murdered or might have just died of the dysentery that's starting to make its rounds through camp. The distinction barely matters. You roll up your cloak with numb fingers. It's still damp. It'll stay damp because there's no way to dry anything properly in camp conditions. You'll sleep under a damp cloak tonight too, and the night after that until either the weather changes or you die, whichever comes first. Medieval soldiers lived with perpetually damp clothing, which meant perpetual skin problems, fungal infections, and a general state of being clammy that would drive a modern person to madness. Willem looks terrible. His face has that waxy quality that means fever, and his cough now comes with visible effort. He's probably not going to make it to the battle. He'll die in his sleep some night from pneumonia or whatever lung infection he's growing, and you'll wake up next to a corpse, and the process will repeat with whoever takes his spot. The turnover rate in medieval camps was significant. Soldiers dropped constantly from disease, and new ones were pressed or recruited to fill the gaps. The army was less an organization and more a slowly regenerating organism that consumed men at one end and produced corpses at the other. But you can't think about Willem's mortality right now because you have your own problems. Specifically, you need to address your feet. With deep reluctance and deeper dread, you pull off your boots. The smell that emerges is violent. It's a smell with physical presence. A smell that makes Willem stop coughing for a moment out of sheer olfactory shock. Your feet are white and wrinkled from being wet for so long, and the blisters from yesterday's march have evolved into open sores that are definitely, absolutely 100% infected. The skin between your toes is breaking down. This is trench foot, though it won't be called that for another several centuries of military history. You're pioneering a condition that will plague soldiers in every future war. You have no bandages, no antiseptic, no modern understanding of germ theory or infection management. What you have is a relatively clean-ish strip of cloth torn from your spare shirt, and the folk wisdom that says you should probably wash wounds with water. So you hobble to the stream, that same contaminated stream from yesterday that's now even more contaminated because thousands of men have been using it all night for various purposes, and you splash your feet with cold water that probably contains more bacteria than solution. It hurts. Of course it hurts. But it's going to hurt worse tonight after another day of marching or standing around in formation, and it's going to hurt even worse the day after that, and eventually you'll either adapt to the pain or you'll collapse and get left behind when the army moves on, which is effectively a death sentence because an injured soldier alone in hostile territory is just a target for bandits, locals, or anyone else who wants easy pickings. You wrap your feet in the cloth strips. You force them back into your damp boots. You stand up and the pain is electric. Every nerve in your feet is screaming, but you've got to walk back to your spot, pack up your meager belongings, and get ready for whatever fresh hell today brings. Maybe it's drill practice. Maybe it's digging latrines. Maybe it's just standing in formation for hours while nobles negotiate. Whatever it is, you'll do it on infected feet with no sleep in damp clothes while hosting your own personal parasite circus. This is night 1. You have at least 3 more nights of this before the battle. Possibly a week. Possibly longer if the campaign extends, which they often did. And every night will be essentially the same. Cold, wet, uncomfortable, dangerous, and accompanied by the slow realization that the glory of medieval warfare is a lie told by people who never had to sleep in the mud while rats ran across their legs and their bunkmate coughed blood into the darkness. You wouldn't last a night. And the thing is, you wouldn't last the night because of the sleeping conditions specifically. You'd last even less time once you factor in everything else that's about to happen to you in this camp. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. First, you need to survive breakfast. Spoiler alert. Breakfast is going to be a war crime against your digestive system. Breakfast formation happens around dawn, which sounds organized until you realize formation just means crowd around the supply wagons and hope you get your share before it runs out. You limp over on your screaming feet, joining the mass of unwashed humanity that's all thinking the same thought. Please let there be food, and please let it be something that won't actively kill me. Both of these are optimistic wishes. The supply situation in a medieval army was a masterclass in logistics failure. Armies moved slowly, consumed resources rapidly, and operated in an era before refrigeration, canning, or any real understanding of food preservation beyond salt it and pray. The food that reached camp had usually been in transit for days or weeks, stored in conditions that would make a modern health inspector weep, and handled by people whose concept of hygiene was wipe your hands on your pants sometimes. Your ration for today is distributed by a quartermaster's assistant who looks like he hasn't smiled since birth. He slaps a chunk of bread into your outstretched hands with the enthusiasm of someone performing a deeply unpleasant civic duty. The bread is hard. Not crusty artisan bakery hard, but genuinely rock-like. You could probably kill someone with this bread if you threw it hard enough. Medieval military bread was often baked weeks in advance, and by the time it reached soldiers, it had achieved a texture somewhere between wood and fossilized clay. But it gets better. As you turn the bread over in your hands, you notice movement. Little dark specks crawling on the surface. Weevils, grain beetles, various other insects that decided your ration looked like prime real estate. This is completely normal. Expected, even. Soldiers called it adding meat to the bread and made jokes about it because the alternative was crying, and crying didn't make the weevils go away. You're supposed to knock the bugs off, but honestly, some soldiers just ate them. Extra protein. Medieval armies ran on gallows humor and questionable protein sources. Next comes your protein ration proper, and this is where things get really dicey. The quartermaster's assistant dumps a piece of salted pork into your bowl. That same wooden bowl that's never been properly cleaned, because how would you even properly clean something in a medieval camp? The pork is gray. Not gray like, oh, it's cooked, but gray like, this meat has achieved a color not found in nature. It's also slimy to the touch, covered in a film that might be fat or might be bacterial biofilm. Hard to say. The medieval soldier's motto was, if it doesn't smell worse than everything else, it's probably fine. Except it does smell worse than everything else. Even in a camp where the baseline smell is open sewer meets locker room, this pork is making a statement. You hold it at arm's length and examine it. There are greenish patches. Those are definitely mold. There's also an iridescent sheen on parts of it, which is the meat equivalent of finding a warning label. In the modern world, this would be biohazard disposal material. In medieval military cuisine, it's Tuesday's breakfast. Just cut off the bad bits. Willem wheezes helpfully, though he's not eating his own portion, which should tell you something. The rest is probably all right. Probably. That word is doing a lot of heavy lifting in medieval food safety. Here's the thing about spoiled meat. It doesn't just taste bad or smell offensive. It's actively toxic. Bacterial contamination can cause food poisoning that ranges from deeply unpleasant to will kill you in 3 days. Parasites in undercooked or poorly preserved pork, particularly trichinosis, were common and devastating. Soldiers regularly died from eating their rations, which is possibly the most absurd way to die in military service, but was shockingly common. But you're hungry. You're not just hungry, you're the kind of hungry that comes from hard physical labor on inadequate rations. Your body is eating itself to find energy, and that chunk of questionable pork is starting to look less like a biohazard and more like a necessity. So you do what soldiers have done throughout history. You make terrible decisions because the alternative is starvation. You take your knife and start cutting away the obviously bad parts. The green mold, the especially slimy bits, the section that's definitely not supposed to be that color. What's left is maybe half the original portion, and it still doesn't look trustworthy, but it looks less immediately lethal. You'll cook it. Fire kills things, right? This was the medieval understanding of food safety, and technically it's not wrong, heat does kill bacteria. But it doesn't eliminate the toxins some bacteria produce, and it doesn't help if you don't cook it thoroughly, which you won't because fuel is limited and patience is non-existent. Into the communal pot it goes, along with everyone else's questionable meat and rock-hard bread broken into pieces to soften. Someone adds water from the stream. Someone else throws in an onion that's more sprout than onion at this point. The teenager contributes a handful of something that might be wild garlic he found, or might be a poisonous plant that looks like garlic. Medieval foraging was a real gamble. The whole mixture starts to bubble over a smoky fire that makes everyone's eyes water. While this culinary disaster simmers, let's talk about what this diet is doing to your body. Medieval military rations were catastrophically deficient in almost every nutrient. Vitamin C? Forget about it. Fresh vegetables were rare and expensive. Fruits were seasonal and didn't travel well. Scurvy was a constant companion on long campaigns, turning soldiers' gums spongy and their teeth loose. Historians still argue whether scurvy or dysentery killed more soldiers in medieval armies, but honestly, it was probably a close race and many soldiers got to experience both. Vitamin A deficiency led to night blindness, which is great when you're supposed to be on watch or fighting in low-light conditions. B vitamin deficiencies caused neurological problems, weakness, and confusion. Protein deficiency meant your body couldn't repair itself from the daily damage of military life. And the lack of dietary fiber, because when you're eating mostly preserved meat and grain products, meant constipation so severe it became a medical issue, though medieval medicine's solution usually involved laxatives that made everything worse. But vitamin deficiencies are the slow death. The immediate threat is contamination. That pork you just dumped in the pot? It might contain salmonella, E. coli, or listeria. The water from the stream has got dysentery, cholera, and various other waterborne pathogens waiting to turn your intestines inside out. The bread? Beyond the weevils, it might have ergot fungus, which causes hallucinations, gangrene, and death in a condition called Saint Anthony's fire. Medieval soldiers sometimes went into battle literally high on ergot poisoning, seeing demons and angels while their fingers turned black and fell off. Your stew has been bubbling for maybe 15 minutes when the quartermaster's assistant starts shouting that the fires need to be put out. Something about conserving wood. Something about enemy scouts. You don't really hear the details because you're too focused on the fact that your breakfast is definitely not cooked all the way through. You can see pink in the meat. The bread chunks are still hard in the middle. But everyone else is ladling their portions into their bowls, so you do too, because if you wait, there might not be any left. The first bite is an experience. The texture is simultaneously mushy and crunchy, the mush from undercooked bread, the crunch from grit and possibly insect parts. The flavor is overwhelmingly salty with notes of decay and smoke. Your taste buds stage a protest. Your stomach, already in rough shape from yesterday's similar meal, receives this new input with what can only be described as resigned horror. You eat anyway. You eat because you're hungry. You eat because you don't know when the next meal is coming. You eat because everyone around you is eating and complaining but still eating, so it must be fine, right? This is the medieval military dining experience. Consuming food that would be rejected by modern prison systems while standing in mud and trying not to think too hard about what you're swallowing. Willem takes one bite and immediately doubles over, coughing and retching. His portion spills into the mud. Nobody helps him. Nobody offers to share. The praying man mutters something about God's will. One of the brothers scoops up the spilled food from the mud and eats it, because waste not want not, and also because he's from somewhere that experienced famine 3 years ago and his standards have been permanently adjusted. Around you, the camp is experiencing similar scenes. Soldiers eating reluctantly. Some vomiting immediately, which is actually their body doing them a favor by rejecting poison, though they don't see it that way. Others saving portions for later, wrapping questionable meat in cloth and storing it in their packs where it'll continue to spoil and attract flies but might be needed if rations get even scarcer, which they definitely will. Here's a fun fact that history classes skip. Medieval armies on campaign experienced constant low-level food poisoning. Not the kind that kills you immediately, but the kind that gives you cramps, diarrhea, nausea, and weakness. Soldiers lived with this constantly. It was just background noise. You learned to fight while your guts were in revolt, march while trying not to soil yourself, and sleep while your stomach churned. The phrase dysentery is just part of military life was so accepted that chroniclers barely mentioned it unless someone important died from it. And dysentery is coming for you. Maybe not from this meal, but soon. The combination of contaminated water, poorly cooked meat, unwashed hands, and the general sanitary nightmare of camp life means your digestive system is about to become a war zone. When it hits, and it will hit, you'll experience cramping so severe you can't stand up straight, diarrhea so frequent you'll essentially live next to the latrines, and dehydration that'll make you dizzy and confused. You'll lose weight you can't afford to lose. Your already limited energy will evaporate, and you'll keep being expected to function as a soldier. But right now, in this moment, you're just trying to finish your breakfast before your body fully processes what you've done to it. You wash down the last lumps of bread stew with a swig from your water skin, which contains water you collected yesterday from the stream and which has been sitting in leather all night developing its own ecosystem. It tastes like wet leather and disappointment, but at least it's wet. The meal is over. You've consumed maybe 800 calories of questionable nutrition. A modern soldier gets 3,000 to 4,000 carefully balanced calories. You're operating on less than a third of that, and most of what you ate was salt, carbs, and bacteria. Your body is now faced with the impossible task of extracting nutrition from this mess while fighting off the various pathogens you just introduced, all while supporting the physical demands of military life. Spoiler, your body is going to lose this fight. You look around at your fellow soldiers. Everyone looks vaguely green. Everyone's making the face of someone whose stomach is beginning to register complaints with management. Willem is sitting with his head between his knees, still coughing but now also making ominous gurgling sounds. The teenager is clutching his belly. One of the brothers is already speed-walking toward the latrine area with the distinctive gait of someone who's about to have a very bad time. And this was just breakfast. You get to do this again for lunch, assuming there is lunch, and dinner, and every meal for the duration of the campaign. Each meal a gamble. Each bite a potential death sentence delivered slowly through bacterial infection or parasitic infestation or simple malnutrition. Medieval soldiers didn't die gloriously in battle. Most of them died inglorious deaths from eating breakfast. You wouldn't survive the food. That's the truth nobody wants to hear when they romanticize medieval warfare. It's not the swords or the arrows or the cavalry charges that would kill you. It's the catering. You'd make it maybe 3 days before the dysentery hit, maybe a week before the malnutrition started seriously compromising your immune system, maybe 2 weeks before some contaminated water or undercooked meat introduced a pathogen your body couldn't fight off. And speaking of things your body can't fight off, we need to talk about what happens when nature calls in a medieval camp. Because if you thought eating was bad, wait until you hear about the bathroom situation. Actually, bathroom is far too generous a word. What's coming next makes everything we've discussed so far look positively civilized by comparison. Your stomach starts making noises about an hour after breakfast. Not subtle noises either. We're talking audible gurgles and protests that Willem can hear from 3 feet away despite his coughing. You know what's coming. Every soldier knows what's coming. It's as inevitable as sunrise, except far less pleasant and infinitely more urgent. You need to use the latrine. Now, in your modern life, using the bathroom is a private affair involving porcelain, running water, toilet paper, soap, and doors that lock. In a medieval military camp, it's a public spectacle of horror that will haunt your dreams, assuming you survive long enough to sleep again. The medieval latrine system, and I'm using the word system very generously here, was essentially humanity's worst idea implemented in the worst possible way. First, you have to find the latrine area. This isn't hard because you can smell it from anywhere in camp. That smell you thought was bad when you first arrived? That was just general unwashed army smell. The latrine smell is different. It's aggressive. It's a physical presence that seems to coat your throat and stick to your clothes. It's the smell of thousands of men with dysentery and food poisoning all using the same inadequate facilities. And it gets worse every hour of every day until the army moves on and some other patch of ground gets the honor of becoming a biohazard zone. The latrine area is downwind from camp, that much the medieval military got right, but downwind is relative when you're talking about a temporary settlement of several thousand people. Wind shifts. Plus, the latrine area is always too small because commanders underestimate how much space is needed when an entire army has simultaneous digestive problems. What you find when you arrive is a scene that would make Dante reconsider his circles of hell. The actual latrines are just trenches. Long ditches dug into the ground, maybe 3 feet deep if you're lucky and the ground isn't too rocky. No seats, no privacy screens, no roof. Just open trenches with a few planks thrown across them if someone got ambitious. Though half the time the planks are slippery or broken or occupied by someone whose face suggests they're experiencing the worst moment of their life so far. You take your place in line because yes, there's a line. Always a line. Desperate men shuffling forward with clenched cheeks and prayer in their hearts. Some don't make it. You can see the evidence of failures all around the latrine area. Spots where soldiers just couldn't wait any longer and dealt with their business wherever they happened to be standing. Nobody judges them. Everyone understands. The medieval military was equal opportunity in its humiliation. When your turn finally comes, and those minutes of waiting feel like hours when your intestines are staging a coup, you position yourself over the trench and confront the reality of medieval field sanitation. The trench is full, not partially full, full. You're looking at days' worth of accumulation from hundreds of sick soldiers, and the sight is matched only by the smell, which at this proximity stops being merely offensive and becomes genuinely dangerous. The fumes alone could knock you out. Historical accounts mention soldiers fainting near latrine trenches, and whether that's from fumes or disease or just the body's decision to shut down rather than process what's happening, it's all bad. There's no toilet paper. Let me repeat that for emphasis. There is no toilet paper. Paper itself is expensive in the medieval period, and using it to wipe your ass would be like using $100 bills as tissues. So what do you use? Leaves, if you can find them and they're not poisonous. Moss, if available. Grass. Straw. Your hand, and then you rinse it in water that's also probably contaminated. Smooth stones. Literally anything you can find, and none of it works particularly well. Some soldiers use something called a gomp stick. A communal sponge on a stick that everyone shares. Let that sink in. A communal sponge that everyone shares. It sits in a bucket of salt water or vinegar between uses, which was supposed to clean it but absolutely did not clean it. Medieval soldiers were basically sharing fecal matter via sponge stick, which is exactly as disease-spreading as it sounds. Historians still argue about how widespread the Gomp stick was in medieval European armies versus Roman ones, but the point is that any society using communal butt-wiping sponges has fundamentally failed at sanitation. You make do with some grass you grabbed on the way over. It's not effective. Nothing would be effective at this point because that breakfast has moved through your system like a toxic hurricane, and what's coming out is not solid. Medieval soldier diarrhea was legendary. The combination of contaminated food, bad water, stress, and whatever parasites you're hosting means your digestive system has essentially given up on processing anything and is just trying to evacuate the threat as quickly as possible. The process is agony. Your stomach cramps so hard you see stars. You're sweating despite the cold. Your legs are shaking from the effort of maintaining your squat over this trench while your body tries to turn itself inside out. Around you, other men are experiencing similar torments. The sounds, oh God, the sounds are a symphony of human misery. Groaning, splashing, things that shouldn't splash. Someone 3 spots down is crying. Someone else is praying loudly. Another is cursing with impressive creativity. And you have no privacy. None. There are men on either side of you, men waiting in line behind you, men walking past because the latrine area is also the throughway to other parts of camp. Everyone can see everyone. The concept of bathroom privacy is a modern luxury that medieval soldiers couldn't even imagine. You're literally shoulder to shoulder with strangers while experiencing the worst gastrointestinal distress of your life. Bonding experience? More like trauma bonding. Here's where it gets even worse. The dysentery. If you're lucky, what you're experiencing right now is just food poisoning from breakfast. Unpleasant, but survivable. But dysentery, proper bacterial dysentery, is making its rounds through camp, and it's only a matter of time before you catch it. Dysentery in medieval armies was a death sentence for a solid percentage of those who contracted it. It spread through contaminated water and food, through the flies that bred in the latrine trenches and then landed on your meals, through contact with contaminated surfaces and people. The symptoms of dysentery go beyond simple diarrhea. You're looking at severe cramps, bloody stool, fever, dehydration, and weakness so profound you can barely stand. Soldiers with advanced dysentery were essentially combat ineffective. They spent their days crawling between their sleeping spot and the latrines, losing weight and fluids and hope, until either their body fought off the infection or they died. And they often died because medieval medicine had no real treatment for bacterial infections beyond pray, and maybe bleed them to balance their humors, which obviously made everything worse. But even if you escape dysentery, you're not safe. The latrine trenches are breeding grounds for every disease and parasite imaginable. Cholera, typhoid, E. coli, various parasitic worms that enter through your feet if you're stupid enough to stand too close to the edge, or through your hands if you touch anything in the area and then touch your face. Medieval soldiers were basically marinating in a pathogen soup, and the latrine area was the concentrated version. The flies are unbelievable. Clouds of them. They breed in the trenches and then spread out across camp, landing on food, on faces, on wounds. Each fly is a tiny disease vector carrying bacteria from the latrines to everywhere else. Medieval people understood that flies were associated with disease. They're mentioned in medical texts as signs of corruption, but they didn't understand germ theory or how disease actually spread, so their countermeasures were ineffective. Waving flies away from your food didn't help when the flies had already landed on it. Covering your water didn't help when you had to uncover it to drink and flies dove in immediately. You finish your business, though finish implies some kind of completion when really you're just reaching a temporary stopping point, and face the next challenge. Cleaning yourself. You use your handful of grass. It doesn't work. You're now wet, uncomfortable, and intimately aware that your clothing is going to be contaminated. Medieval soldiers developed rashes and infections in areas that polite society doesn't discuss, and now you understand why. The combination of poor hygiene, rough clothing, constant moisture, and bacterial contamination created the perfect environment for all kinds of skin problems. You pull up your hose. Basically medieval tights that are already soaked through with sweat and mud and now have a new contamination source, and try to wash your hands. There's a barrel of water near the latrines designated for this purpose, but it's been used by hundreds of men before you, so washing your hands in it is basically just redistributing the bacteria. You do it anyway because the alternative is walking around with obviously unwashed hands, and even medieval standards have some limits. The walk back to your spot through camp feels eternal. Your legs are weak. Your stomach is still cramping. You know you're going to have to make this walk again in an hour, maybe less. The teenager from your mess group passes you heading toward the latrines at a near run, face white, and you exchange a look of mutual understanding and pity. You're all going through this together. It's arguably the most egalitarian aspect of medieval warfare. Dysentery doesn't care if you're a knight or a peasant, though at least the knights have private tent latrines and don't have to use the communal trenches. When you get back, Willem looks at you. Bad. Bad. You confirm. He nods. He gets it. Everyone gets it. Latrine talk is constant in camp. How many times did you go today? Is it bloody? Are you keeping food down? What did you use to wipe? These intimate details become casual conversation because everyone's experiencing the same biological nightmare. Historians studying medieval military life note that letters and chronicles from the period are full of latrine complaints, which suggests it was such a dominant part of the experience that even noblemen felt compelled to document it. Here's something that really drives home how bad the latrine situation was. Medieval armies on the move often left trails of sick soldiers behind. Men who were too weak from dysentery to continue, too ill to keep up with the march. They'd be left by the side of the road, essentially abandoned, where they'd either recover on their own, unlikely, be helped by locals, very unlikely, or die alone, very likely. The latrine situation didn't just make life miserable. It literally reduced the fighting strength of armies through attrition. Some estimates suggest that 10 to 15% of medieval armies were combat ineffective at any given time due to digestive issues alone. And it's about to get worse for you personally because your body is about to remind you that dysentery is a frequent customer. You barely make it back to your spot before you need to turn around and head back to the trenches. This time there's no line, small mercy, but there's also no dignity, no relief, just more cramping and more humiliation and more evidence that your insides have fully rebelled against the lifestyle choices that brought you here. This is your day now. This is every day. Back and forth to the latrines. Trying to time your meals so you're not eating right when your stomach decides to evacuate everything. Trying to sleep but waking up every few hours with urgent need. Trying to function as a soldier while your body is essentially shutting down non-essential functions to focus on the crisis happening in your gut. You wouldn't survive the latrines. Not the latrines themselves, obviously, but what they represent. The complete breakdown of sanitation, the constant exposure to disease, the physical drain of chronic diarrhea and dehydration. Your modern immune system, which has never had to deal with medieval levels of bacterial exposure, would be overwhelmed immediately. Your modern sensibilities, which expect privacy and cleanliness, would shatter. Your modern body, accustomed to proper nutrition and hydration, wouldn't be able to recover from the constant assaults. But let's say you somehow survive this. Let's say your body manages to adapt to the dysentery, or you're one of the lucky few with iron guts who can eat contaminated food and drink sketchy water without immediate consequences. You're still not safe, because we haven't even talked about what happens when you get injured or sick in a way that requires medical attention. And trust me, in a medieval camp, you're going to need medical attention. The question is whether you'll survive the cure. It's day 3 in camp, and your foot infection has gotten worse. Remember those blisters from the march? The ones you washed in contaminated stream water and wrapped in dirty cloth? They've evolved. The skin around them is red and swollen. There's heat radiating from the area that you can feel through your boot. And there's pus. Lots of pus. The yellowish-green kind that signals your body is fighting a losing battle against bacteria, and it's time to seek help. This is a mistake. You don't know it's a mistake yet, but it absolutely is. The medical tent, and again, tent is generous because it's really just a roped-off area with some canvas overhead, is identifiable by the screaming. Not constant screaming, just periodic bursts of it that punctuate the general camp noise like horrible exclamation points. You follow the sound like the world's worst treasure map, limping on your infected foot, and arrive at a scene that makes the latrines look sterile by comparison. Welcome to medieval military medicine, where the motto is first do some harm, then do more harm, then maybe they'll die and we can stop. Your medical professional today is a barber surgeon, not a doctor. Doctors were educated men who mostly treated nobles and definitely didn't travel with common military camps. Not a physician. Those required university training and wouldn't be caught dead in a field hospital. No, you get a barber surgeon, which is exactly what it sounds like. A guy who cuts hair and also performs surgery, because apparently medieval society decided those skills were similar enough to bundle together. It's like going to your dentist for engine repair. The logic is questionable, but here we are. The barber surgeon working today is named John, or maybe Thomas, or possibly Richard. Medieval records suggest about 60% of men were named one of those three, and he looks exactly as qualified as you'd fear. His apron is stiff with dried blood from previous patients. His hands are unwashed because hand-washing between patients won't become medical practice for another 400 years. His tools are laid out on a board. Saws, knives, hooks, and various implements that look more like torture devices than medical instruments. Nothing is clean. Nothing is sterile. The concept of sterilization won't exist for centuries. What's your problem? John Thomas Richard asks, not looking up from the soldier he's currently working on. That soldier is getting stitches for a knife wound, not from battle, from a camp fight, and he's not getting any anesthesia because anesthesia doesn't exist yet. He's just biting down on a leather strap and trying not to pass out while the barber surgeon sews him up with thread that was probably used on the last guy and definitely wasn't cleaned between uses. Foot infection, you say, and immediately regret speaking because it puts you on the medical radar. Sit there. I'll get to you after this one stops bleeding so much. You sit on a stool that's damp with something you don't want to identify and watch the barber surgeon work. His technique is enthusiastic. He's not being deliberately rough, but he's also not being gentle. Medieval medical training emphasized speed over precision, partly because patients couldn't tolerate long procedures without anesthesia, and partly because infection was so common that taking your time just gave bacteria more opportunity to establish themselves. The logic was almost sound, except for the part where the surgeon's unwashed hands and dirty tools were introducing more bacteria than speed could compensate for. The soldier getting stitched up finally passes out, which the barber surgeon treats as a convenience rather than a concern. Makes them easier to work on when they're not thrashing, he explains to no one in particular, then calls for an assistant to drag the unconscious man to the recovery area, which is just a corner of the tent where patients lie on the ground until they either wake up or don't. Right foot infection. Let's see it. You remove your boot with difficulty because the swelling has made your foot larger and everything hurts. The barber surgeon takes one look and makes a face, which is concerning because he's presumably seen infected feet before, and this one is bad enough to register as notable. That's poisoned, he announces, using the medieval term for infected. Blood's gone bad. We need to let it out. What he means by let it out is bleeding. Not draining the infection, that would be too logical, but actual bloodletting, because medieval medical theory held that most diseases were caused by imbalanced humors, and removing blood would rebalance them. This theory is completely wrong, but it dominated medical practice for over 1,000 years, which really speaks to humanity's capacity for being confidently incorrect. The barber surgeon produces a small knife and a bowl. The knife has visible rust on it and probably hasn't been cleaned since it was forged. This doesn't concern him at all. Give me your arm, he says, and before you can fully process what's happening, he's made a cut in your forearm and is draining your blood into the bowl. You're already weak from dysentery and malnutrition. You don't have spare blood to give. But medieval medical practitioners believed removing blood was therapeutic, so they removed it liberally, often taking pints from patients who could barely afford to lose ounces. The amount of blood in your bowl grows. You start feeling dizzy. Your vision gets sparkly at the edges. The barber surgeon seems unconcerned. That should help with the fever, he says confidently, displaying the medieval medical professional's remarkable ability to be certain about things that are objectively false. He ties a dirty cloth around your arm to stop the bleeding. That cloth has been used before. It will introduce new bacteria to your bloodstream. Congratulations, your arm is now infected too. But he's not done with your foot. Need to drain that poison, he announces, and now he means the pus. This part is actually medically sound, draining an abscess can help, but his execution is medieval. He takes his rusty knife and, without warning or cleaning the area first, stabs into the infected part of your foot. The pain is extraordinary. You understand now why the previous patient was screaming. You're screaming too. The barber surgeon ignores this. Screaming is just background noise in medieval medical settings. He squeezes your foot, forcing out pus and blood and fluid, and the pain somehow gets worse. You're gripping the stool so hard your hands ache. Your vision is tunneling. Someone might be holding you down, or you might be hallucinating from the pain. Hard to say. Good. Good. The barber surgeon mutters, like he's pruning a garden hedge rather than squeezing infected fluids from your body. Getting the corruption out. What he's actually doing is spreading the infection deeper into your tissues by squeezing it around. But he doesn't know that because germ theory won't be discovered for another 400 years. Historians still argue about how many medieval medical interventions actually helped versus harmed. But the consensus is generally most of them made things worse. When he's satisfied he's squeezed out enough pus, a satisfaction based on feeling rather than science, he announces it's time for the treatment. You foolishly hope this means bandaging. It does not mean bandaging. We'll cauterize it, burn out any remaining poison. He produces a metal rod that's been sitting in the fire. The tip glows red hot. You understand what's about to happen and you try to stand up, to run, to escape, but hands grab you. Other soldiers pressed into medical assistant duty and hold you down while the barber surgeon approaches with his branding iron of healing. The smell hits you first. Burning flesh has a distinctive odor, sweet and horrible. Then the pain hits, and it's unlike anything you've experienced. The hot metal sears into your wound, and you're screaming, definitely screaming so loud your throat will be raw for days. The barber surgeon holds the rod there for several seconds that feel like hours, making sure to burn out all the corruption. What he's actually doing is creating severe tissue damage that will complicate healing and create scar tissue that'll affect your mobility forever, assuming you survive the next few days. Cauterization was a common medieval treatment for infected wounds, and while it did kill surface bacteria through heat, it also destroyed healthy tissue, created conditions for deeper infections, and hurt so much that patients sometimes died from shock. When he finally removes the hot iron, your foot is a burnt, oozing mess. You're sobbing. You might have vomited. The hands release you and you slump on the stool, shaking and trying not to look at what's been done to you. Now for the poultice, the barber surgeon says cheerfully, like he's just given you a spa treatment rather than torture. He mixes something in a bowl, herbs, grease, possibly some animal dung because medieval medicine loved using dung for everything. The theory was that dung's heat would draw out the wound's coldness and rebalance the humors. The reality was that it introduced tetanus and countless other infections. He slathers this mixture onto your burnt, traumatized foot. It stings. Of course it stings. Then he wraps it in cloth, the same cloth he's been using for other patients, unwashed, stiff with old blood and pus. Keep that on for 3 days, he instructs. If the foot turns black, come back and we'll take it off. He says this casually. Amputation is just another procedure to him, though it has about an 80% mortality rate in medieval field conditions. If your foot turns black with gangrene, coming back for amputation just means choosing which thing kills you, the gangrene or the amputation surgery and subsequent infection. That'll be 3 pennies, he adds. You have to pay for this. You have to pay for the privilege of being bled unnecessarily, having your foot squeezed and burned and covered in dung, and being given medical advice that might kill you. Medieval military medicine wasn't free, soldiers paid for treatment, which meant poor soldiers often died of treatable conditions because they couldn't afford the fee, or died of the treatment because they paid the fee. You hand over 3 pennies from your meager pay, money you were saving for literally anything else, and limp out of the medical tent on a foot that's now worse than when you came in. The cauterization has made it impossible to walk normally. The bleeding has made you dizzy and weak. The dung poultice is already attracting flies. You're in worse shape than before seeking help, which is peak medieval medical experience. Back at your spot, Willem takes one look at you and shakes his head. Saw the barber surgeon? You nod, too exhausted to speak. Should have just waited. either gets better on its own or kills you. Treatment just speeds up whichever it's gonna do. This is folk wisdom, but it's not wrong. Medieval soldiers often had better outcomes avoiding treatment than seeking it, which is possibly the most damning indictment of medieval medicine possible. The barber surgeons meant well, mostly, but they were operating with fundamentally flawed medical theories and no understanding of sanitation, infection, or actual human anatomy beyond what they could see. Your foot throbs with each heartbeat. The bleeding from your arm has mostly stopped, but you've got a fresh wound there now, wrapped in contaminated cloth. You're weaker from blood loss. You're in more pain than before. And the dung poultice on your foot is literally introducing new pathogens to your traumatized tissue. Over the next few days, you'll watch your foot closely. If you're lucky, and luck is doing heavy lifting here, your body's immune system will fight off the infections despite the treatment rather than because of it. If you're unlucky, gangrene will set in, turning your foot black and smelly, and you'll face the choice between amputation or death. If you're really unlucky, sepsis will develop from all the new bacteria introduced by treatment, and you'll die fever-mad in your sleeping spot while Willem coughs nearby and nobody really notices until you stop moving. The medical tent continues its operations around camp. Screaming punctuates the afternoon. Soldiers go in with minor injuries and come out with major complications. The barber surgeon works tirelessly, genuinely believing he's helping, applying techniques that have been used for centuries and will continue to be used until the Renaissance starts asking uncomfortable questions about why so many patients die after treatment. You wouldn't survive medieval military medicine. Not because the injuries would kill you, though they might, but because the treatment would finish what the injuries started. Your modern immune system would be overwhelmed by the bacterial load from contaminated instruments and dung poultices. Your modern body, expecting sterile procedures and antibiotics, would have no defense against the infections introduced by well-meaning but deadly medical intervention. And your modern mind would break watching the barber surgeon approach with his rust-covered tools and confident ignorance, knowing that seeking help guarantees making things worse. But let's say you survive the medicine. Let's say your foot somehow heals despite the dung, or at least doesn't kill you. You're still in camp. You still have to function as a soldier. And now we need to talk about the gear you're expected to carry and wear, the weapons you're supposed to fight with, and why all of it is designed to kill you before any enemy gets the chance. It's been 5 days in camp, and the call finally comes. Armor inspection and weapons drill. Your foot is still healing, barely, wrapped in fresh cloth because the dung poultice attracted so many flies you had to remove it. You can walk, sort of, with a limp that makes you look like a broken puppet. But the army doesn't care about your comfort level. Today you become acquainted with the equipment that's supposed to keep you alive but will more likely contribute to your death in ways you haven't imagined yet. The quartermaster's area is chaos. Soldiers are being issued equipment or trying to repair equipment or arguing about equipment quality, which is universally terrible. Your armor, and I'm using that word loosely, consists of what a common foot soldier could expect in a medieval army. Padded gambeson, maybe a chainmail shirt if you're lucky, an iron helmet that's seen better decades, and various leather pieces that are supposed to protect your limbs but mostly just restrict movement and collect sweat. The gambeson comes first. It's a quilted jacket stuffed with wool or linen scraps, sewn in vertical channels to keep the stuffing from bunching up. In theory, it provides decent protection against cuts and some cushioning against blows. In practice, it's a wearable sauna that weighs about 15 pounds and turns your torso into a sweat factory. You pull it on over your filthy shirt, and immediately the medieval military experience becomes claustrophobic. The gambeson doesn't breathe. Breathability wasn't a design consideration in medieval armor manufacturing. It's designed to stop weapons, not promote airflow. Within minutes of putting it on, you're sweating. Not just damp, actively dripping. The wool inside starts to absorb your sweat, getting heavier and more disgusting. Remember that you haven't bathed since before the campaign started. That sweat isn't clean. It's carrying bacteria, dead skin cells, and the accumulated filth of weeks of military life. The gambeson is becoming a bacterial growth medium you're wearing on your body. Feels heavy, doesn't it? Willem observes, struggling with his own gambeson. He's lost weight from his cough and dysentery, and the armor hangs on him like he's a child playing dress-up in his father's clothes. The teenager looks absolutely buried in his gambeson, which is sized for a grown man and wasn't adjusted for his smaller frame because medieval military logistics didn't do custom fitting. But the gambeson is just the foundation. If you're fortunate or unfortunate, depending on your perspective, you also get chainmail. A chainmail shirt, or hauberk, is a long shirt made of thousands of interlocking iron rings. It's a technological marvel of medieval metallurgy. It's also 25 to 30 pounds of metal that you're now expected to wear on top of your already heavy gambeson. The chainmail goes over the gambeson with the help of another soldier because getting into full armor alone is nearly impossible. The weight settles on your shoulders immediately. Your back, already damaged from sleeping on the ground, protests loudly. The chainmail hangs to your mid-thigh, and with every movement, the rings click and shift and pull at each other, creating a constant metallic whisper that will become the soundtrack of your misery. Here's what they don't tell you about chainmail. It's exhausting to wear. Not just the weight, though that's significant. It's the way the weight distributes unevenly, creating pressure points on your shoulders and back. It's how the mail pulls down on you constantly, making you feel like you're being slowly compressed. It's how the metal rings pinch skin through your gambeson when you move wrong. And it's how the chainmail holds heat like a greenhouse, trapping your body warmth and your sweat until you're essentially steaming inside your own armor. Stop fidgeting. The quartermaster's assistant snaps as you try to adjust the weight. You'll get used to it. You won't get used to it. Soldiers never got used to it. Medieval accounts are full of complaints about armor weight and discomfort. Knights could afford better-fitted armor with weight distribution systems, but common soldiers got mass-produced chainmail that fit whoever it fit, and tough luck if it didn't fit you. You could adjust it somewhat, but mostly you just suffered. The helmet is next. An iron pot helm, basically a metal bowl with eye holes. It weighs maybe 5 pounds, which doesn't sound like much until you consider that it's 5 pounds on your head and neck, which aren't designed for constant helmet wearing. You put it on, and immediately your world narrows. Your peripheral vision vanishes. Your hearing becomes muffled. The helmet sits tight on your head, and within minutes you're sweating inside it too. Sweat runs into your eyes. You can't wipe it away easily because the helmet's in the way, and anyway your hands are dirty. Medieval helmets were notorious for causing heat exhaustion. The metal absorbed sunlight and conducted it directly to your head. There was no padding system, no ventilation, just metal and your increasingly overheated skull. Soldiers regularly passed out from heat stroke while wearing helmets in warm weather, and you're starting to understand why. You've been in full armor for maybe 20 minutes and you already feel like you're cooking from the inside out. Now the weapons, the quartermaster announces, and you're issued your primary armament. A spear. Not a sword. Swords were expensive and required training that common soldiers didn't receive. Not a bow. Longbows took years of practice to use effectively, and crossbows were expensive. No, you get a spear. 10 feet of wood with a metal point, weighing about 5 pounds, and it's both your primary weapon and your walking stick for the rest of the campaign. The spear is actually a pretty good weapon for mass infantry combat. It's got reach, it's relatively simple to use in formation, and it's cheap to produce and replace. But it's also unwieldy. Try walking through a crowded camp with a 10-foot pole. Try sleeping with it. Try doing literally anything with this long stick that you can't let out of your sight because if it's stolen, you're paying for the replacement. The spear becomes your constant companion. Your annoying friend that's always in the way but that you can't abandon. You also get a knife, the same eating knife you already had, which is now officially designated as your secondary weapon. This knife couldn't cut butter aggressively, but it's supposed to be your backup in close combat. Medieval military planning was optimistic about how well a dinner knife would perform against armed opponents. Some soldiers get additional equipment. The lucky ones get shields, wooden boards with leather or metal reinforcement, weighing 8 to 15 pounds depending on size. The shield goes on your left arm, adding more weight, more things to carry, more surfaces to trap heat against your body. Between the gambeson, chainmail, helmet, spear, and shield, you're now carrying 50 to 60 pounds of equipment. Plus your personal pack with your spare clothes and food bowl and everything else you own, which is another 20 pounds. You're a walking pack mule, except pack mules probably had better working conditions. Formation! The sergeant bellows, and everyone staggers into rough lines. You're supposed to look like a military unit. You look like a mob of overheated, uncomfortable, barely mobile men who are all questioning their life choices. The sergeant doesn't seem to notice or care. We drill for 2 hours. You'll learn to move as one. 2 hours. In full armor. In the sun that's now beating down because of course the clouds cleared just in time for this torture. You haven't eaten anything substantial since that questionable breakfast. You're still weak from dysentery and blood loss. Your foot is throbbing in your boot. And now you're expected to march, turn, advance, and retreat on command while carrying the weight of a small teenager in equipment. The drill begins. Forward march. You step forward. The man next to you steps on your spear shaft. You stumble. Your chainmail shifts and pinches your shoulder. Sweat is pouring down your face inside the helmet. You can't see properly because the eye holes don't align with your actual vision, and also there's sweat in your eyes. Someone behind you isn't maintaining formation and keeps jabbing you with their spear tip. This is going great. Halt. Reform. Too slow. Again. Again. And again. And again. The sergeant is relentless, and he's doing this from horseback, in the shade, not wearing 60 pounds of armor. Easy to be demanding when you're comfortable. The sun climbs higher. The temperature rises. Inside your armor, it's got to be 20 degrees hotter than the ambient temperature. You're cooking. Your gambeson is completely soaked through with sweat now, adding water weight to the wool weight. Your chainmail is beginning to rust from the salt in your sweat. Every movement is exhausting. Around you, soldiers are struggling. The teenager has gone pale and is swaying. One of the brothers has stopped responding to commands and is just standing there, trembling. Willem collapsed 10 minutes ago and is being dragged to the side while still wearing his armor because no one has time to help him out of it. The gaunt prayer-mutterer is praying again, but faster now, more desperately, and you realize he might be experiencing heat stroke, which is a real and serious danger. Medieval armies lost soldiers to armor-related heat exhaustion regularly. There are accounts of battles being delayed because too many soldiers collapsed from heat before fighting even began. Heavy armor in warm weather was a death sentence for a percentage of troops, and commanders just accepted this as operational overhead. Historians still argue about whether the protection armor provided was worth the casualties from wearing it, but soldiers didn't get to make that choice. Your vision is starting to tunnel. The edges of your sight are going dark and sparkly. You're dizzy. Your heart is racing, but you also feel sluggish, disconnected. These are signs of heat exhaustion progressing toward heat stroke. Your body is overheating and can't cool itself because you're wrapped in insulation and metal. You need water. You need shade. You need to take off this armor immediately. Maintain formation. No breaks until we complete the drill. You're going to die here, not from an enemy weapon, but from your own equipment combined with an indifferent sergeant and medieval military culture that viewed physical suffering as character building. You sway. Your spear tip dips. Someone curses as it nearly stabs them. You try to lift it, but your arms are shaking from exhaustion and heat. Then, mercifully, a horn blows. Not the drill horn, a different sound. The sergeant's head whips around. Assembly called. Dismissed. Formation at camp center in 1 hour. The drill breaks. Soldiers scatter, desperate to get out of the sun. You stumble back toward your sleeping spot, dragging your spear, your shield banging against your leg with each step. You need help getting the chainmail off. Willem is still unconscious, so the teenager helps you, his hands shaking. The mail finally comes free and the weight lifts and you can breathe again, sort of, except you're still overheated and dizzy and possibly dying. You collapse on your spot. The gambeson is still on because you don't have the energy to remove it yet. It's completely saturated with sweat. You smell like a wet dog that died and then was reanimated through dark magic. The teenager looks at you with something between pity and recognition that this is his future too. Water. You need water. You chug from your skin, and it's warm and leather-flavored and possibly contaminated, but it's wet and your body is screaming for hydration. You drink too fast and immediately cramp. Your stomach, already damaged from dysentery, rejects this sudden influx. You turn and vomit, adding one more puddle of biological fluid to the camp's collection. This is what wearing armor in a medieval military camp is like. Not the glorious image from movies where knights stride around in full plate looking impressive. No, this is the reality. Suffering, heat exhaustion, constant discomfort, and the grinding knowledge that you'll have to put all this equipment back on soon because there's an assembly called and you can't attend without armor because that's a disciplinary offense. You finally pull off the gambeson. So wet it drips. The shirt under it is plastered to your skin. You're gonna put these back on later, the same wet, sweat-soaked, bacteria-laden clothes, because you don't have spares, and even if you did, they wouldn't dry in time. This is your uniform until the campaign ends or you die. You'll sleep in it, march in it, fight in it, and probably die in it. Your weapons and armor lean against your pack. The spear shaft is already showing signs of wear. The shield has new scratches. The chainmail is developing rust spots that you're supposed to clean with sand and oil, except you have neither sand nor oil, so the rust will continue. Medieval military equipment degraded quickly because maintenance supplies were scarce and soldiers were too exhausted to maintain their gear properly even when supplies were available. You look at your equipment with a mixture of need and resentment. It's supposed to protect you, but right now it feels like just another thing trying to kill you. The weight that exhausts you before battle begins. The heat trap that causes stroke. The mobility restriction that'll make you slow and clumsy when speed matters. The armor is both necessary and dangerous, and you're stuck with it. You wouldn't survive the equipment. That's the brutal truth. Your modern body, accustomed to temperature-controlled environments and breathable fabrics, would shut down from heat exhaustion in medieval armor within hours. Your modern strength, built in gyms with proper nutrition, would fail under the constant burden of carrying 60 to 80 pounds of equipment on inadequate calories. Your modern expectations of gear that's designed with the wearer's comfort in mind would shatter when confronted with armor that prioritizes cheapness and basic protection over anything approaching user experience. But the worst part, the absolute worst part, is that you haven't even used this equipment in combat yet. Everything we've just described is just wearing the armor and drilling with it. The actual battle, when it comes, will be exponentially worse. And that's where we're heading next. Into the chaos of medieval combat, where your expensive armor and crude weapons will be tested against other men's expensive armor and crude weapons, and nobody's going home unchanged. The horn blows at dawn on day 7. Not the assembly horn, not the drill horn, the battle horn. The sound that means all your suffering so far was just the warm-up act. And now the main event begins. Around you, soldiers are scrambling, pulling on still damp gambesons, checking weapons with shaking hands, and wearing expressions that range from determination to barely suppressed terror. The teenager is crying quietly while strapping on his armor. Willem is somehow still alive despite his cough, which has reached new depths of wetness and desperation. Nobody says much. What is there to say? You pull on your gambeson, and it's even more disgusting than yesterday. The sweat never dried, and now it's cold and clammy against your skin. The chainmail goes on top, that familiar oppressive weight settling on your shoulders. Helmet on, shield strapped to your arm, spear in hand. You're as ready as you'll ever be, which is to say, not ready at all. Nothing could prepare you for what's about to happen. The army forms up in the pre-dawn darkness. Not neat lines like drill practice, but rough blocks of men pressed together shoulder to shoulder. You're in the middle rank somewhere, not the front where the initial contact happens, not the back where you might escape, but somewhere in the crushing middle where you'll experience every nightmare of medieval combat without the mercy of a quick death or easy retreat. Here's what Hollywood gets completely wrong about medieval battles. They're not about individual heroism or sword duels or dramatic one-on-one confrontations. They're about mass, about thousands of men compressed into tight formations, pushing against other formations, and what happens in that pressure is less combat and more human meat grinder. You're about to discover that the most dangerous thing in medieval warfare isn't the enemy. It's the sheer physics of too many bodies in too small a space. The march to the battlefield takes an hour. You're already exhausted before you see the enemy. Your foot is screaming with each step. Your armor is heavy. Your stomach is empty because you couldn't eat breakfast. Nerves and dysentery make a compelling argument against food. Around you, men are praying, vomiting, pissing themselves. Medieval soldiers went into battle in various states of biological distress, and the smell of fierce sweat and evacuated bowels added to the general atmosphere of nightmare. Then you see them, The enemy formation, maybe a half-mile away across a field that's exactly as muddy as your camp. They look like you, indistinct figures in armor carrying spears and shields. They're probably just as miserable, just as terrified, just as unprepared for what's about to happen. But they're the enemy, and the fact that you have more in common with them than with the nobles commanding your respective armies doesn't matter now. The commanders give speeches. You can't hear them. You're too far back, and anyway, your helmet muffles everything. But you can see the nobles on their horses, gesturing dramatically, presumably saying inspiring things about honor and glory in God. The men around you aren't inspired. They're just waiting for the inevitable. The armies advance. Not running, nobody runs in armor while carrying weapons through mud. It's a walk. Purposeful, terrible walk toward collision. Your formation starts moving, and you move with it because the alternative is getting trampled by the men behind you. The mass of soldiers functions like a slow-motion avalanche. Individual choice stops mattering. You're part of the formation now, carried forward by momentum and the press of bodies. The distance closes. 500 yards. 400. 300. You can see individual faces in the enemy formation now. They look scared. You probably look scared too. 200 yards. Someone in your formation starts screaming. Not words, just noise, releasing terror as sound. Others join. Soon the whole formation is yelling. A wall of noise meant to intimidate the enemy and convince yourself you're fierce rather than terrified. 100 yards. 50. The enemy formation is screaming too. The combined noise is overwhelming, chaotic, drowning out thought. Your heart is hammering so hard you can feel it in your throat. Your hands are slick with sweat inside your gloves. The man next to you is praying in a steady stream of Latin he probably doesn't understand. Someone behind you is openly weeping. 20 yards. 10. You lower your spear. Everyone lowers their spears. The enemy lowers theirs. You're looking at a wall of spear points coming at you, and you're part of a wall of spear points going at them. Your mind is screaming to stop, to run, to do anything except continue walking into those sharp points. But the formation pushes forward and you go with it because there's no choice anymore. 5 yards. 3. The spear tips are right there. Time does something weird, simultaneously speeding up and slowing down. You can see individual droplets of mud flying from marching feet. You can count the rust spots on the enemy's chainmail. You can see the white of someone's terrified eyes through their helmet. Then impact. The two formations collide, and nothing in your life has prepared you for this moment. The noise is indescribable. Metal on metal, wood cracking, screaming, the wet sounds of spear points finding flesh. The forward momentum continues even as the front ranks hit, and you're crushed forward by the men behind you, compressed into a space where there isn't room, where bodies are packed so tight you can barely breathe. Your spear is useless. You tried to aim it, but in the collision, it got tangled with someone else's spear, and now it's pointing the wrong direction, and you can't adjust it because there's no room to maneuver. The man in front of you takes a spear point in the shoulder and screams directly into your face. Blood sprays. He doesn't fall. There's no room to fall. He just stays upright, held in place by the crushing press of bodies, screaming and bleeding while you're pressed against his back. This is medieval combat, not the choreographed swordplay of movies, but this barely controlled chaos where you can't see what's happening, can't move effectively, can't even identify who's friend or enemy in the press. You're in a standing room, only crowd except everyone has weapons and people are dying, and you can't escape because 10 ranks of soldiers are behind you, pushing forward, and there's nowhere to go but forward into more chaos. The man in front of you stops screaming. He's dead, probably, but he's still standing because the bodies are too compressed for him to fall. You're pushed tighter against his corpse. You can smell the blood, thick and metallic. Your spear is completely jammed now, useless. You try to draw your knife, that pathetic eating knife, and manage to get it out, but there's no room to stab anyone. You can barely move your arms. Someone steps on your injured foot. The pain is electric, shooting up your leg. You scream, but nobody hears because everyone's screaming. The press surges forward and you go with it, trampling over something that might be a body. Your foot, the one the barber surgeon burned and wrapped, loses its boot somehow in the mud and corpse pile. Now you're standing on your infected, Burned foot in mud that's mixed with blood and shit and God knows what else. Heat. You're overheating again. The armor traps your body heat and the heat of the hundreds of bodies pressed around you. You're sweating heavily. You can't breathe properly. Partially the helmet restricting air, partially the crushing pressure of bodies making it hard to expand your chest. You're starting to panic. Not fear of death, but claustrophobic panic. Trapped. Can't move. Can't breathe. Can't escape. A spear point comes from somewhere, you don't see where, and punches into your shield. The impact drives your shield into your chest. The shield strap cuts into your arm. The spear withdraws and strikes again, and this time it gets around your shield and catches your chainmail-covered thigh. The mail stops the point from penetrating. This is what armor is for. But the force of the blow bruises your leg deeply. You'll have a hematoma the size of a fist if you survive this. The battle has been going for maybe 10 minutes. Feels like hours. You have no sense of how it's going overall. Winning? Losing? No idea. Your world is compressed to the few feet around you. The press of bodies, the screaming, the smell of blood and excrement. Because yes, many soldiers are losing control of their bowels in the stress and fear and compression. Medieval battles literally stank. Men are dying around you in ways that aren't dramatic or quick. The man to your left takes a spear to the gut and stands there for several minutes, making horrible noises, before finally going still while remaining upright. The teenager from your mess group is somewhere in this press. You can hear his voice screaming for his mother, but you can't see him and can't reach him. Wilhelm is probably dead already given his condition. People are dying of heat stroke, of suffocation in the press, of being trampled, of wounds, of pure overwhelming stress causing hearts to give out. You can't tell friend from enemy anymore. You stab with your knife when you can move your arm, aiming at anything that seems like it might be hostile, but you're probably hitting your own side as much as the enemy. Everyone's doing the same. Friendly fire or friendly stabbing accounts for a significant percentage of medieval battle casualties. Historians estimate that in the chaos of melee combat, 20 to 30% of wounds came from your own side. There's no way to avoid it in this compressed nightmare. The press shifts suddenly. The formation is moving forward or backward, you can't tell. You're dragged along, stepping on bodies, slipping in mud and blood. You fall. This is it. If you go down in this press, you're dead. Trampled by your own side, by the enemy, by anyone who steps on you because there's no room to step anywhere else. Somehow, you manage to grab someone's gambeson and pull yourself back up. Your spear is gone. Lost somewhere in the press. Your shield is still attached to your arm but badly dented. Your knife is still in your hand through sheer grip strength and panic. You're bleeding from somewhere but you don't know where. Everything hurts in a generalized way that suggests multiple injuries you'll discover later if there is a later. The horn blows. Not the charge horn. The retreat horn. Your side or theirs, you can't tell, but someone's pulling back. The press starts to loosen slightly. Men begin to fall, all those corpses that were held upright by compression finally toppling. You stumble over them, stepping on faces, on hands, on armor. Bodies everywhere. The mud is churned into a soup of blood and soil. You're moving backward now, definitely. Your formation is withdrawing. Is this victory or defeat? No idea. You're just following the movement, desperate to get out of the press, to find space to breathe. The enemy isn't pursuing aggressively. They're probably as exhausted and traumatized as you are. Medieval battles often ended not because one side was destroyed, but because everyone simultaneously decided they couldn't continue. The formations separate. There's 50 yards between them now. 100. The battlefield between is carpeted with bodies. Some are moving, wounded men trying to crawl away, crying for help that won't come because both sides are reorganizing and wounded men in the killing zone are on their own. Scavengers, camp followers, and opportunists are already creeping onto the edges of the battlefield, checking bodies for anything valuable. They don't discriminate between dead and wounded. If you're down and have something worth taking, they'll take it, and if you resist, they'll make you stop resisting. You're back in your formation's position, what's left of it. You look around. The teenager is gone. Willem is gone. One of the brothers is here, but the other isn't. The prayer mutterer is sitting on the ground, rocking back and forth, not responding to anyone. Your mess group of 8 started the day. You think maybe 4 are still alive. Maybe. You haven't found all the bodies yet. You collapse to your knees. Everything hurts. Your foot is a catastrophe. The wound reopened, covered in mud and blood and possibly infected all over again. Your leg has that deep bruise from the spear thrust. You're cut on your arm somehow through the chainmail, which means the mail broke or the cut came from behind and got through a gap. You're covered in blood, most of it not yours. Your gambeson is torn and filthy. Your chainmail saved your life, but it's damaged now, with broken links that would need repair you can't afford and probably won't get. You're alive. Somehow, impossibly, you're alive. But you don't feel victorious. You feel hollowed out, traumatized, and acutely aware that this could happen again tomorrow, or the day after. The campaign isn't over just because you survived one battle. Medieval warfare was a series of engagements, and soldiers who survived one frequently died in the next because their bodies and minds were broken from the first. Around you, other survivors are dealing with the aftermath in various ways. Some are celebrating, the kind of manic, desperate celebration of people who expected to die and didn't. Others are sitting in shocked silence. Many are vomiting from stress and exhaustion. Some are checking themselves for wounds they didn't notice in the chaos. Blood loss and adrenaline can mask serious injuries. The medieval battlefield after combat was a scene of collective trauma processing in real time. You wouldn't survive the actual battle. That's the hard truth. Your modern body, never exposed to violence at this scale, would shut down from shock and horror. Your modern mind, accustomed to controlled environments and personal space, would fracture in the claustrophobic nightmare of melee press. Your modern combat training, assuming you have any, involves firearms and maintained distances, not knife fighting in a crowd so dense you can smell what your neighbor ate for breakfast. The medieval battlefield wasn't a place for heroes. It was a meat grinder that processed human beings into casualties, and your survival would be purely chance, not skill or preparation. But here's the thing. Even if you survive the battle, you're not safe. Not even close. Because what comes after the fighting might be worse than the fighting itself. The battlefield doesn't end when the horns blow. It just transforms into a different kind of hell, one that nobody talks about because it's too grim even by medieval standards. The battle ended 2 hours ago, and you're still on the battlefield. Not by choice, you tried to leave with the formation, but you collapsed after 100 yards and nobody stopped to help you. Why would they? Everyone's dealing with their own crisis. So now you're sitting in the mud, surrounded by the aftermath, and discovering that the real horror of medieval warfare isn't the fighting itself. It's what happens next. The wounded are everywhere. Men with spear wounds leaking blood into the mud. Soldiers with crushed limbs from being trampled. Bodies that are technically alive but won't be for long, making sounds that you'll hear in your nightmares if you live long enough to have nightmares. Medieval battlefields after combat were open-air trauma wards without doctors, without painkillers, without hope. You're looking at hundreds of men in various stages of dying, and there's no organized medical response, no evacuation plan, no triage system. There's just suffering. The ones crying for help are the lucky ones. They're conscious and alert enough to cry out. The silent ones are either dead or too far gone to make noise. You watch a man 20 feet away trying to hold his intestines in after a belly wound. He's not screaming. He's just working methodically, trying to stuff everything back in, and the rational part of your brain knows he's dead, but his body hasn't accepted it yet. Medieval abdominal wounds were essentially 100% fatal. No antibiotics. No surgery. Just slow sepsis and agony until death arrived as mercy. And then you see them, the looters. They're not soldiers. They're camp followers, local opportunists, even some soldiers from your own side who've decided that the dead don't need their possessions. They move across the battlefield with practiced efficiency, checking bodies, stripping anything valuable. Armor, weapons, boots, coins if the soldier had any. They don't care if the body is actually dead or just wounded and unconscious. If you're on the ground and can't defend yourself, you're fair game. A woman, some camp follower you've seen around, is methodically stripping a wounded soldier 3 rows over. He's weakly protesting, trying to push her away, but she ignores him and takes his chainmail anyway, pulling it over his head with total indifference to his cries. She checks his mouth for gold teeth. He has none. She moves on to the next body. This is her job, her livelihood. Medieval battlefields were economic opportunities for scavengers. The dead and dying represented inventory. You should move. You should get up and try to make it back to camp. But you're so tired. The adrenaline has worn off completely, and what's left is bone-deep exhaustion combined with shock, blood loss, and the accumulated trauma of the past week. Your body has decided to shut down non-essential functions, and apparently being alert enough to avoid looters counts as non-essential. A man approaches you. Not a soldier, no armor, no weapons visible. He's checking you out, calculating. Are you alive enough to resist? Are you valuable enough to bother with? You try to grip your knife, but your hand isn't responding properly. He sees this. His eyes light up. He's found an easy mark. Still alive then, he says conversationally, kneeling next to you. That's unfortunate for you. Dead men don't feel me taking their things. He reaches for your chainmail. You try to push him away, but you're so weak. He laughs. Not cruel, just matter of fact, and starts pulling at your armor. Easy now. Fighting just makes this harder for both of us. Then a boot connects with his head. He sprawls in the mud. You look up and see one of your sergeants, a different one, not the one from drills, standing over you. This one's still in formation, the sergeant says to the looter. Touch him again and I'll split your head. The looter scrambles away, muttering curses. The sergeant doesn't offer to help you up. He's just protecting army property. You and your equipment belong to the army until the campaign is over or you die, and the sergeant's job is inventory control. But at least he stopped the looting. Small mercy. Can you walk? The sergeant asks. You try to stand. Your legs shake. Your injured foot screams. But you manage to get upright, sort of. You're vertical, which is the medieval military standard for functional. Back to camp, the sergeant orders, already moving to the next wounded soldier. You're not special. You're just one of many he's collecting. The walk back is worse than the battle. At least during the battle, adrenaline masked the pain. Now you feel everything. Every step on your ruined foot. Every bruise under your armor. The cuts you didn't know you had. Your body is cataloging injuries and sending detailed reports to your brain, and all the reports are bad. You pass other wounded making their way back. A man with his arm hanging at a wrong angle. Another with a facial wound that's destroyed one eye. A soldier being carried by two others, leaving a trail of blood. Nobody's helping anyone they don't have to help. Medieval military medicine after battle was first come, first served, and with limited resources, served often meant received inadequate care before dying. You make it back to camp and immediately face a new problem. Where's the medical tent? Which direction? Everything looks the same through your exhaustion and shock. You wander, stumbling, until you find the medical area by following the screaming. It's worse than before, much worse. The barber surgeons are overwhelmed. There aren't enough of them for the number of wounded. There aren't enough supplies. There isn't enough space. Wounded soldiers are lying everywhere, on the ground, in mud, bleeding and waiting for treatment that might not come. The barber surgeons are doing triage, but medieval triage is brutal. Can you survive with treatment? Maybe you get treatment. Probably going to die anyway? You're moved to the side to die without wasting resources. Not sure? Well, let's see who else needs help more urgently. You join the mass of wounded, sitting in mud that's more blood than water at this point. Your turn will come eventually. Maybe. Hours pass. Men die waiting. The man next to you, the one with the belly wound you saw earlier, somehow he made it back to camp. Finally stops moving. Nobody notices for another hour. When your turn finally comes, you're barely conscious. The barber surgeon takes one look at your foot, the burned, infected, now re-traumatized foot, and shakes his head. That's going bad. Probably need to take it. Amputation. He's talking about amputation. The words don't fully register through your shock and exhaustion. Can you save it? He shrugs. Maybe, maybe not. Probably not. Even if we keep it, you likely won't walk right again. Infection's deep. He's already moving on to the next patient. Come back tomorrow. If the foot's black, we'll take it then. That's it. That's your medical consultation. Come back tomorrow to see if you need your foot amputated. In the meantime, good luck. The barber surgeon doesn't have time for your relatively non-urgent case. There are men with sucking chest wounds, traumatic amputations, head injuries. Your infected foot ranks low on the priority list. You limp back to your sleeping spot. Your mess group is gone, dead or scattered, you don't know. Your pack is still there, surprisingly not looted, though someone clearly searched through it. Your spare shirt is gone. Your wooden bowl is cracked. But your cloak is still there, so you have something to sleep under. Night falls. The camp is quieter than usual. Fewer men. The sounds are different too, more moaning, more crying, less casual conversation. The battle has broken something in the collective spirit. Everyone who survived is dealing with trauma, injury, or both. And everyone knows this might happen again in a few days. Medieval campaigns were series of battles, each one grinding down the survivors until there weren't enough effective soldiers left to continue. You can't sleep despite the exhaustion. Every time you close your eyes, you're back in the press. The crushing bodies, the screaming, the wet sounds of weapons finding flesh, the smell of blood and excrement and fierce sweat. Your mind is trying to process what happened and failing. This is trauma, actual clinical trauma. In the modern world, you'd receive counseling, medication, support. In medieval military life, you get told to stop being weak and prepare for the next battle. Your foot is throbbing in a way that suggests the infection is spreading. You should check it, but you're afraid to look. Schrodinger's foot. It's both salvageable and gangrenous until you observe it. And right now, you'd rather live in uncertainty than face the possibility of amputation. Around you, other survivors are having similar nights. Some are drinking. Alcohol is one of the few medications that actually works, at least for emotional pain. Others are praying. Many are just lying there, staring at nothing, lost in their own mental aftermath. The medieval battlefield created psychological casualties that nobody knew how to treat because psychology wouldn't be invented for centuries. Soldiers just broke, and either they recovered on their own or they didn't. A few spots over, someone starts screaming. Not from pain, from nightmare. He's thrashing in his sleep, reliving the battle. Others wake him up, not gently, because his noise is disturbing everyone else's attempt to not think about the battle. He wakes confused, terrified, and then remembers where he is and what happened. He starts crying. Nobody comforts him. Everyone's dealing with their own crisis. This is the aftermath no one talks about. The chronicles written by monks and nobles record battles as events. The armies met. Victory was achieved. Casualties were heavy. They don't record this. The screaming wounded, the psychological trauma, the survivors lying in mud wondering why they're alive when better men died, the infected wounds slowly killing soldiers that the battle didn't, the looters and the desperation and the slow realization that surviving one battle just means you'll probably die in the next. You wouldn't survive the aftermath. Not physically, though the infections and injuries might kill you, but mentally. The psychological weight of medieval combat, combined with the complete absence of support systems or trauma care, would break your modern mind. You're accustomed to a world where traumatic events are acknowledged, where PTSD is recognized and treated, where survival comes with counseling and community support. Medieval soldiers got none of that. They just carried the trauma forward until it destroyed them or until they became so numb they couldn't feel anything anymore. And even if you survived physically and mentally, even if your foot healed or you adapted to life without it, even if you processed the trauma and became functional again, you're still not going home. Because here's the final nightmare of medieval military life. There is no good ending to this story. Victory doesn't mean you go home. Defeat doesn't mean you get to leave. The medieval military had you in its grip, and it wasn't letting go until you were used up completely. It's been 3 weeks since the battle. Your foot is still attached, which feels like victory until you realize it's a victory that comes with constant pain and a limp that marks you as damaged goods. The infection subsided, not because of treatment, but because your body somehow fought it off despite everything working against it. You're one of the lucky ones. The man 2 spots over lost his leg to gangrene. He died screaming 2 days after the amputation, and they buried him in an unmarked mass grave with 40 other soldiers who didn't make it through recovery. But you survived. You're alive. And now you're facing the cruelest joke of medieval military service. There's no going home. The word comes down through the commanders. The campaign continues. The battle you survived was just one engagement in a larger conflict that nobody bothered to explain to you. There are more enemies to fight, more territory to secure, more nobles' ambitions to fulfill with your blood and suffering. The army is moving out in 2 days, and you're expected to march with it, infected foot and all, because the medieval military didn't do medical discharge for common soldiers. What if I just leave? You ask one of the few members of your original mess group who's still alive. His name is Peter. You finally learned it after 3 weeks of living shoulder to shoulder. Just walk away during the march? Peter looks at you like you've suggested flying to the moon. Desertion? They'd hang you if they caught you, and they'd catch you. Where would you go? He's right. You're deep in foreign territory. You don't know the language well. You have no money. What little pay you've received went to the barber surgeon and replacing your stolen spare shirt. You have no food beyond what the army provides. The countryside is full of locals who hate foreign soldiers and would either kill you or turn you in for a reward. And even if you somehow made it home, what then? You abandoned your military obligation. Your lord could have you executed. Your family would be shamed. Your village would reject you. Desertion was theoretically an option, but practically a death sentence. Medieval armies maintained control through a combination of threats, lack of alternatives, and the grim reality that staying with the army, miserable as it was, offered better survival odds than striking out alone. Historians estimate that desertion rates varied wildly depending on campaign conditions, but soldiers who deserted successfully were rare, and soldiers who deserted and lived to tell about it were even rarer. Besides, Peter continues, where's home right now? You think your village is still standing? Haven't had news in weeks. Could be burned. Could be conquered by the other side. Could be empty because everyone fled or died of plague. He's not being cruel, just realistic. Medieval warfare devastated civilian populations. The army you're in might be fighting to protect your homeland, but protection in medieval terms often meant the home got destroyed anyway, just by friendlies instead of enemies. So you can't leave. But you also can't stay, not really, because staying means marching to the next battle and the next until you die or the campaign ends, whichever comes first. And campaigns could last months, years even. There are records of soldiers who left for what they thought would be a summer campaign and didn't return home for 3 years, if they returned at all. The army starts preparing to move. This means packing up camp, which sounds organized but is actually controlled chaos. Soldiers scrambling to gather their possessions. Quartermaster's assistants screaming about missing equipment. Commanders trying to count heads and realizing they've lost 30% of their force to death, permanent injury, or successful desertion during the post-battle confusion. The medieval military was perpetually understaffed and overcommitted. You pack your things. Takes 2 minutes because you own almost nothing. Your cloak, your cracked bowl, the clothes on your back, your weapons. The chainmail is still damaged. You never got it repaired because repairs cost money you don't have. Your spear was lost in battle and you've been issued a replacement that's even worse quality than the original. Your shield is cracked and won't hold up to another serious engagement. You're going into the next battle with substandard equipment, inadequate healing, and the full knowledge of exactly how horrible battle actually is. The first battle, you had ignorance to shield you. This time, you'll march forward knowing exactly what's coming. The march begins. Your foot screams with every step. The boot doesn't fit right anymore because of the swelling and scar tissue. You've wrapped it in extra cloth, but that just makes the boot tighter, cutting off circulation. You're developing new blisters on top of old scars. But you march anyway because stopping means being left behind, and being left behind means dying alone in hostile territory. Around you, the army is a shadow of what it was. Wounded soldiers limping, shell-shocked men staring blankly ahead. The formation is loose, sloppy, nothing like the organized march that brought you here. Morale is gone. Nobody's singing marching songs. Nobody's joking. The battle broke something fundamental in the collective spirit, and it's not coming back. How many more battles? You ask Peter during a rest stop. He shrugs. Until we win, or lose, or until there's nobody left to fight. This is medieval military strategy in a nutshell. Keep going until one side can't continue. No exit strategy. No completion date. Just ongoing violence until exhaustion made continuation impossible. The campaign drags on. Another camp. Same misery, different location. Another battle, smaller this time, but just as terrifying. You survive again, taking a sword cut across your ribs that your damaged chainmail barely stops. 3 more men from the original company die. The teenager's body was never found. You assume he died in the first battle, but there's no way to know. Willem's cough finally killed him 2 days into the march. Peter makes it through but takes a head wound that leaves him confused and speaking in circles. He probably has a brain injury. The medieval understanding of concussion was, he got knocked silly, and the treatment was, hope he gets better. He doesn't get better. And still the campaign continues. More marching, more camps, more battles. Each one grinds away at the survivors. You're not the same person who arrived at that first camp. You can't be. That person had illusions. That person thought military service might be honorable or at least survivable with dignity intact. This person, the one you've become, is just trying to make it through each day without dying. Your body is failing. The repeated stress, the poor nutrition, the injuries, the infections, the dysentery that comes and goes but never fully leaves. You've lost weight you couldn't afford to lose. Your teeth are loose from scurvy. Your skin has sores that won't heal. Your hair is falling out in clumps. Medieval soldiers on extended campaigns experience total physical breakdown. The human body can't sustain combat readiness on inadequate calories, no medical care, and constant stress. You're consuming yourself from the inside out. Your mind is failing too. You can't remember what your village looks like. Can't remember your family's faces clearly. Can't remember why you're here or what you're fighting for. The days blur together into a continuous stream of suffering punctuated by moments of terror. You've stopped thinking about the future because the future probably doesn't include you. You've stopped thinking about home because home might not exist anymore. You just exist in the present moment by moment, putting one destroyed foot in front of the other. Then, finally, word comes down, the campaign is ending. Not because your side won, nobody won. Really, both sides are too exhausted to continue. Not because peace was negotiated, the nobles will start another war in a year or two. But because it's nearly winter, and medieval armies couldn't campaign through winter. The cold, the lack of food, the impossibility of foraging, winter made warfare impractical. So the armies are disbanding until spring, when the violence can resume. You're going home. Except home is a 6-week march away, and you're in no condition to make it. Neither is anyone else. The army begins disintegrating as soldiers peel off in groups, heading in various directions. The commanders don't try to maintain order. The campaign is over. Their obligation is fulfilled. What happens to the soldiers now is not their problem. You start walking, not marching. The formation is gone. Military discipline is gone. Just walking, generally westward, toward where home might be. You're with a loose group of maybe 20 other soldiers, all heading the same direction, all in various states of physical and mental collapse. Safety in numbers, except none of you are capable of providing safety. The journey home is harder than the campaign. No regular food supply, you're foraging, begging from villages, stealing when you're desperate enough. No medical care whatsoever. When someone in the group gets sick or injured, they're just left behind because nobody has the resources to help. You pass 3 members of your group sitting by the roadside, too weak to continue, and you keep walking because stopping to help means you might not get up again either. Villages close their gates when they see you coming. You're armed, desperate soldiers in foreign territory. Exactly the people villagers fear most. Some villages leave food outside the walls just to make you go away. Others have nothing to give and you move on, hungrier. One village tries to fight you off, and the confrontation turns violent, and you're part of a group of soldiers robbing peasants because that's what you've become. You hate yourself for it, but hunger overrides morality. 2 weeks into the journey home, Peter dies. The head wound got infected, you don't know how, it was healing, but now he's feverish and confused, and then one morning he doesn't wake up. You bury him in a shallow grave by the roadside because that's all you can manage.
No marker, no ceremony.
Just another dead soldier among thousands, forgotten before the earth fully settles. You make it home after 5 weeks. Not 6 weeks, you walked faster than expected because staying on the road meant dying on the road. Your village is still standing, which is a miracle. Your family is alive, which is a greater miracle. They barely recognize you. You're gaunt, scarred, limping, aged 20 years in a few months. Your mother cries. Your father looks at you with something between relief and horror. Your younger siblings are frightened of you. You try to explain what happened, but the words don't come. How do you describe the camps, the battles, the aftermath? How do you make them understand the claustrophobic nightmare of the press, or the casual cruelty of the looters, or the way dying men sounded in the night? You can't. So you don't. You just sit by the fire and stare at nothing, and your family works around you like you're a piece of furniture, because you're not really there anymore. Part of you is still on that battlefield, still in that camp, still marching toward the next horror. And here's the final cruelty. In 6 months, the nobles will decide to resume the war. The summons will come again, and you'll have to go back because that's how medieval military obligation worked. Service wasn't one and done. It was recurring, potentially for life, until you were too old or too injured to fight. You survived this campaign, but there will be another, and another, until finally one of them kills you, or you're so broken that death would be mercy anyway. You wouldn't survive going home, not because the journey would kill you, though it might, but because there is no home anymore. Not really. Home is a place where you feel safe, where you can rest, where you belong. But you don't belong anywhere now. You're too damaged for civilian life, too traumatized to integrate back into peaceful society. The medieval soldier's homecoming wasn't joyful reunion. It was slow realization that the person who left was gone, replaced by this hollow shell that flinches at loud noises and can't sleep through the night and sees violence in every shadow. Medieval warfare didn't just kill soldiers on battlefields. It killed them slowly in camps and marches and in the long aftermath. It killed their bodies through infection and malnutrition and untreated wounds. It killed their minds through trauma and horror and the absence of any support structure. And it killed their souls through the things they witnessed, the things they did, the things they became in order to survive. You wouldn't last a day in a medieval battlefield camp because that day would break something essential in you that could never be repaired. The food would sicken you. The filth would overwhelm you. The violence would traumatize you. The medical care would kill you. The equipment would exhaust you. The battle would shatter you. The aftermath would hollow you out. And the journey home, if you even made it that far, would show you that survival wasn't victory. It was just a different kind of defeat. And so our journey ends, friend. You've walked through the mud and blood and misery of medieval military life, and hopefully you're lying in your comfortable bed, in your climate-controlled room, far removed from the horrors we've explored tonight. Be grateful for the distance. Be grateful for the centuries that separate you from that suffering. Be grateful for antibiotics and psychology and the idea that maybe soldiers deserve to be treated like human beings rather than disposable resources. The medieval battlefield camp was hell in a very literal sense. A place of endless suffering where the torments were both physical and psychological, where death would be mercy but mercy rarely came. We remember medieval warfare as knights and honor and glory, but the reality was this: mud and disease and trauma and slow destruction of everyone unfortunate enough to be caught in the machine. Sleep well, knowing you're safe. Rest easy in your comfort. And maybe, just maybe, spare a thought for those long-dead soldiers who suffered through realities we can barely imagine, in service to causes they didn't understand, for nobles who didn't know their names. They deserved better. We all deserve better. And thankfully, we've built a world that's at least slightly less cruel, though we still have work to do. The fire's burning low now. Your eyes are heavy. Let the weight of history slip away and drift into dreams that are gentler than the reality we've explored. You're safe. You're home. And no one's calling you to war tomorrow. Sweet dreams, friend. Until next time.